I'm Head of Community Safety and Protection at the City Council, and I've been chairing the Low Emission Zone Delivery Group for the last, well, I guess it's more than a couple of years. We've been working on this with a bit of a hiatus during last year for COVID, which has actually put back the target date for the low emission zone. So we're now at the stage where we have a final option that we're currently consulting on. I think there's about a week to go. Consultation closes, I think, at midnight next Monday. So I know it's just been timing to try and get to this group to talk you through it. But I think we did have a session with certainly city centre businesses, someone that our city developments colleagues had organised a couple of months ago. So there has been some dialogue on what we're planning. So the plan is to finish this consultation. Well, David will actually talk through the timeline for what comes next in his presentation. So it's probably best to hand over to David to talk you through the process and what the final low emission zone is going to look like, and what the next steps are, and then we'll have a chance to take any questions or comments at the end of that. So I'll hand over to David. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Yeah, just to further introduce myself, my name is David Murtagh from Sistra, who are a transport consultancy that have been, supporting the council over the last couple of years in developing the low emission zone. So what I'm going to do just now is just share my screen and a presentation for about 20 minutes or so, and then plenty of time thereafter for questions. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Great. Okay, so first of all, just a bit of an overview to the whole process, and throughout all the work that we've been undertaking, we've been following Transport Scotland's National Low Emissions Framework, and this really has allowed us to build up a suitable evidence base and develop a range of LEZ options that were considered appropriate for the city. So we started from a total of about 40 options for the low emission zone, and the National Low Emissions Framework process identified 5 suitable options then to be taken forward to consultation and model testing. Now, the initial public and stakeholder consultation was held in autumn 2019, of which one of the engagement events was with the business community at the time. And the consultation and the subsequent detailed traffic modelling has helped to identify then the preferred final option for Dundee's LEZ. So what I'm hoping to do through this presentation really is just summarise how we reached the preferred option, and then give details on the operation and enforcement of the proposed LEZ. Now, this session is actually the last briefing session that we're holding. We've been holding them over the last 8 weeks or so during what is the statutory consultation period for the low emission zone as it's proposed, and this is defined in the regulations laid out by the Scottish Parliament. So, as I said, the National Low Emissions Framework recommended 5 options for consultation and model testing, and all the areas that were considered viable low emission zones were contained inside the inner ring road area or the city centre area. There were bus only options. The first 2 options on the screen there are bus only options. So that means that buses would have to meet the LEZ emission standards, but all other vehicles would be unaffected. And there were 2 variants really of the bus only options that either included or excluded the bus station. And then there were 3 variants of what we've termed an all vehicle low emission zone. So by that we mean that every vehicle entering the LEZ area has to meet the LEZ emission standards as set in the legislation. So that's your diesel and petrol cars, your vans, your heavy goods vehicles, taxis, buses, coaches, etc. And I'll define, exactly what these are, compliant and non-compliant vehicles, in a few slides' time. So as I said, there were 3 variants, and these included or excluded car parks on the periphery of the low emission zone. So option A, 2A, included all car parks. Option B excluded Bell Street and West Market Gate car parks. and option C excluded Bell Street, West Market Gate and the Wellgate Centre car park. When we went to consultation on these 5 options, we did receive quite a lot of feedback on Lochie Road. So you may be aware that Lochie Road does have some air quality issues. There are particularly high levels of nitrogen dioxide, which is one of the pollutants that we're concerned with. Now, we originally considered Lochie Road options as part of the initial process, but these were screened out because it was felt through a desktop exercise, at least, that it would bring too much rerouting of traffic throughout the city and create problems elsewhere. But the feedback was that we should actually model these and test these in a traffic model. And when we did so, we actually found that our assumptions held true, and there was actually a lot of rerouting and resultant congestion in the city, which really created a number of problems. So that being said, and through the modelling and the sort of considerations on legislation, enforcement, safety, and the previous consultation outcomes, really the final recommended LEZ option is the area bound by the inner ring road, but excluding the 3 car parks that can be accessed on the periphery, so Bell Street, West Market Gate and the Wellgate Centre car park. So we can see hopefully now the area on the screen. So the area shaded in blue is the proposed low emission zone area, and vehicles have to be compliant to enter this blue area, or else they will face penalty charges for doing so. So I'm going to look at this preferred option now in more detail, really sort of first summarising the modelling results and then looking at the detail of how and when it will be enforced. So as I've mentioned, we undertook traffic modelling as a sort of first step of the kind of detailed assessment. And what we do in a traffic model is essentially build a model that's the base model, we call it, and it represents existing conditions as Dundee is at the moment. And then we code into that the low emission zone and all the various restrictions that come with that. And we assess what happens to traffic. So does it create problems elsewhere? Does it create congestion? Does it move the air quality problems to another part of the city? And so on. But what we actually found when we modelled the preferred final option that you've just seen on screen was that the network operates relatively similarly to existing conditions. So by that I mean there's essentially no changes to, or significant changes to, journey times or congestion. What we do find, however, is a slight distribution or change in the way traffic flows around the inner ring road. And I'll maybe best show this if I jump back to the map. We see some decrease in traffic on West Market Gate north of the Westport roundabout. And interestingly, or importantly, there's actually an air quality exceedance or high levels of nitrogen dioxide just outside the low emission zone. So we're actually impacting that area without including it in the LEZ area. And the reason for the reduction is there's less vehicles now entering the city centre from West Bell Street, exiting at Ward Road or Argyle Gate, because non-compliant vehicles can no longer enter. So we get the reduction on the main road outside the LEZ. The flip side of that really is that we get a slight increase south of the Westport roundabout. So the non-compliant vehicles, the ones that can't enter the blue area, then choose to park either at the West Market Gate car park or the Green Market car park, just south of the inner ring road. So they can still access the city centre on foot, but they're just parking on the periphery. We also see an overall reduction in traffic levels inside the LEZ area. As you'd expect, we're stopping non-compliant vehicles from entering. And it's approximately about a 30% reduction in traffic, and that reflects the fact that about 30% of the current traffic in Dundee is non-compliant or doesn't meet the emission standards. Now, the next step after traffic modelling is air quality modelling, so try to assess what happens to air quality. Now, air quality modelling was due to be undertaken a few months ago, with outputs from the traffic model then feeding into the air quality model. So air quality modelling is undertaken by SEPA, the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, and they do that through the National Modelling Framework. Unfortunately, they were the victims of a cyber attack just before Christmas last year. You may have seen that in the news, and it's really significantly impacted all their systems, and that's delayed the National Modelling Framework analysis. That said, through the detailed traffic modelling, which I've just touched on, and the previous sort of consultation results, we could still identify the preferred final LEZ option, but what we require still to do is quantify the impact of that option on air quality and emissions. Now, SEPA get back up and running just prior to submission of this preferred scheme to Council Committee at the start of June, and they undertook emissions analysis. Now, emissions analysis is the sort of first step before a full air quality assessment. And what the emissions analysis showed was that NOx emissions reduce by an average of 78% inside the LEZ area, so a real significant reduction inside the city centre. And in actual fact, we saw reductions on key corridors in and out of the city as well. For example, about 20% reduction on Lochie Road. Now, the reason for that was predominantly buses have to be compliant to enter the LEZ area. And if they're clean to enter the LEZ area, they're clean for their entire route. So if they serve the whole Lochie Road corridor, for example, those clean buses and the benefits of those clean buses are felt throughout the city. So when available, the full air quality modelling, which considers not only emissions, but factors such as weather and how pollutants may be dispersed as they interact and are released from vehicle tailpipes, will be undertaken. It's been undertaken at the moment by SEPA, and this has to be done prior to submission of the final scheme to Scottish ministers. So moving on to the detail then of the LEZ and how it will operate. So the LEZ will include enforcement of buses, diesel and petrol cars, light goods vehicles and heavy goods vehicles as specified in the low emission zone regulations. So compliant vehicles, therefore, in Dundee, so those who won't face penalty and can drive as they do now, are Euro 6 for buses, coaches and HGVs. So that's generally vehicles registered from about 2013 onwards. Euro 6 as well for diesel cars and LGVs. That's generally vehicles registered from 2015 onwards, and Euro 4 for petrol cars and LGVs, generally vehicles registered from about 2006 onwards. So importantly, these are national standards, as I say, laid out in the Scottish Parliament. So if a vehicle is compliant in Glasgow or Aberdeen or Edinburgh, it will be the same for Dundee. And just to confirm that Glasgow, Aberdeen and Edinburgh are also proposing to include all the same vehicle types in their low emission zones. The LEZs themselves will be enforced through a network of AMPR cameras, and these will capture the registration of vehicles as they pass a camera, and then this will be cross-checked against a compliance, non-compliance central database. In terms of enforcement dates, so it's Dundee City Council's intention to introduce the LEZ on the 30th of May 2022. And the introduction of any low emission zone in Scotland has to be followed by a grace period before penalty enforcement can start. And these are defined in the Transport Scotland Act. So the minimum grace period allowed, or the minimum grace period you have to allow for, I should say, is 1 year. And the maximum grace period before enforcement is 4 years. So that would take us up to 2026. Now in Dundee, a 2-year grace period is proposed. So this will apply to both residents and non-residents of the LEZ area and for all non-exempt vehicle types, meaning enforcement will commence for all on the 30th of May 2024. Now to inform the grace period, because as I've just said, there is a range of possible grace periods that could have been proposed. We held discussions with a number of key stakeholders over the last few months before the preferred option was finalised, of which the business community was one. We spoke to the Business Recovery Group, I think they might be called, in February, March of this year. And we also sent out a questionnaire through the same sort of forum in March as well of this year, just really looking for feedback of when businesses are likely to be ready for. And really, the reasoning for that was, the COVID-19 impact really has, had an unprecedented impact on the wider community, or the wider economy, I should say, particularly, our city centres. Discussions were also held with bus operators. Now, bus operators really, or buses, are key to ensuring that the city meets its targets on emissions, and we need all buses to be compliant. Now, again, their investment plans over the last year or so have been severely disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and they made us aware essentially that they would not achieve a fleet of fully compliant vehicles by 2023, which would be the earliest enforcement date. And a key theme from the consultation with businesses and bus operators over the last few months, but also from the consultation back in 2019, was the belief really that consistency in enforcing the LEZ was needed. So having a grace period that is the same for all vehicles gives that consistent message of when you or your business have to be ready for. So I think accounting for the impacts of COVID-19 over the last year or so, the projected bus fleet compliance and that consistent message of enforcement really all pointed to a grace period required or suggested that a grace period greater than the required 1 year minimum was appropriate. So in Dundee, therefore, a 2-year grace period was proposed. And just to put that in a bit of context, that means a compliant bus or HGV in 2024 will be up to 11 years old. A compliant diesel car or van will be up to 9 years old, and a compliant petrol car or van will be up to 18 years old. Now, some vehicles are exempt from penalty enforcement. Again, these are specified in the regulations and listed there on screen. So emergency vehicles, vehicles for disabled persons, military vehicles, vehicles of historic interest and showman vehicles. And the regulations also specify the penalty charges by vehicle class, and that these charges can and will escalate for repeat offences. So the first offence for all vehicles is £60, and then up to a maximum of £480 for cars and vans, and up to £960 for buses, coaches and HGVs. And then subsequent charges are repeats of that maximum fine. Just a few slides now, just before I finish. Firstly, I think it's important to mention funding, where the Scottish Government is committed to helping those who most need assistance to meet the LEZ requirements. So this has been available for the last few years, and in this current financial year, funding has been made available again through the Low Emission Zone Support Fund, and it is available for businesses within a 20-kilometre radius of any LEZ in Scotland, and also households have funding available to them, as well as a retrofit service for some vehicle types. Particularly buses are making use of this in Dundee, HGVs not, and taxis not so much, particularly in Dundee. Finally, just to summarise the timeline for delivery of the low emission zone. So at the start of June, a committee report detailing this final LEZ went to the Community Safety and Public Protection Committee, where the proposals were accepted. And we're now just coming to the end of this 8-week statutory consultation period. The aim now really is to report back to committee in September on the consultation findings and detail the final submission of the LEZ, and thereafter there'll be a 28-day period for objections to the LEZ scheme. The plan then is to submit the final LEZ scheme to Scottish ministers early next year before declaration of the LEZ in May 2022, and thereafter, as I've said, a 2-year grace period will follow before any penalty enforcement. So that's really everything from myself. As we said at the start, this will be circulated, this presentation, and there's various links throughout it. More information can be found at the Dundee City LEZ website there, and that includes links to all the supporting documents such as the NLEF report and the emissions analysis, and also the consultation portal where you can leave feedback. You can also submit any representations directly to the council on the email address there, and the closing date, as Tom said at the start, is the 9th of August. Okay, that's everything from myself. I'll stop sharing my screen and then we can open up for questions. I'll just turn on my camera perhaps. It looks like there's quite a few on the call. It would maybe be useful for us, just if you want to, just to state your name and who you represent. That might be quite useful. Does anyone have any questions? We normally use Microsoft Teams actually for these, and there's a hands up thing. I don't know if there's a similar one in Zoom.
There is.
There is. So if you know how to use it, please feel free.
Yeah, I mean, I think, David, it's quite straightforward. I mean, not that I'm making any excuses for lack of questions, because I know that I know a few people on the call. I know that if they had any questions, they would jump in. But yeah, I mean, I think it is fairly straightforward. I think that's a really useful update on kind of what's happened, where we're at in the journey. Yeah, it might just be that actually it was such a you know, a comprehensive update, nobody's kind of got anything to come in and ask about, I would say.
I think, maybe just add, I think the important thing we want to do is communicate what's happening as much as anything else. So we'll distribute the presentation if you've got wider networks to distribute it to. I know there's not much time to respond to the consultation, but at least it lets people know what the programme is. And then as we get the final scheme approved, there will be a lot of publicity in the run-up to, in advance of enforcement happening. There'll be signage going up as well. So there'll be a lot of information going out about when it's happening and a push to make sure everyone's aware in good time as well. So that will be kind of the next phase once we actually have the scheme approved. So there will be a lot of information for people to pick up on and messages for people to pick up on as we go forward.
Yeah, we have a hand up, Trudy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yep, it's just really what Tom was saying. If you could produce a sort of a poster or a leaflet that I can send out in an all staff email, it just makes it easier, just with the map on it. I think really the map bit's the key bit, because it lets people see that they can still pick up students from the railway station without going into zone. It doesn't really affect our fleet, because I think we've now got 19 electric vehicles, so I'll just ban any of our fleets going into the zone, so that's an easy one. I would like to use this as well to push forward, you know, the salary sacrifice scheme you can get for buying cars. I've been trying to push for this for a few years, is it colleague cars, and put on a stipulation that they have to buy an electric vehicle. So that's something that this might give HR, I might give them a bit of a rocket, because I've been shouting at them for a few years now. So having all that information, and if I can then send it to HR and use it as justification for introducing this for staff, because we've just put in another 12 chargers last month on campus. I think we've now got over 35 on campus or something. It's quite a ridiculous. So the 12 though that we put in last month, because they're new, and the 12 months free charging. So I expect when the word gets out, but that's the other thing at the moment, I don't know if people are aware, the Charge Place Scotland map, it moved, the back office and Sfarco are now running it, and unfortunately a lot of the information has not been passed over. So the map is inaccurate, it's showing chargers in the wrong places, it's not showing lots of chargers, it's showing because a lot of the detail wasn't passed over. So I'm just letting people know, in case you use these chargers, there's lots of issues. We also had a whitelist created because we allow our staff to charge free of charge and students at any charger on campus, even the ones that we charge public. But we had to create a whitelist. So we sent that to Charge Place Scotland, and that was not handed over. So I'm getting lots of staff emailing me, moaning that they're getting charged for charging on campus. So just to let you be aware that these are future challenges. Having technology up to date is crucial. And also a lot of people don't fully understand. I mean, most people do if they work in transport at all, what automatic number plate recognition is. A lot of people don't understand exactly what it does. They get worried about spying and all sorts. Are you recording my mileage, blah, blah. And they also don't realise that all new cars have a Bluetooth chip. It's another thing that people don't realise, and it can be monitored. So yeah, it's what Tom was saying, it's all about educating the public, because people that have had or run electric vehicles, we are up to speed with this. It's all the other people. And also with it changing from 2030 with no ICEs from 2030. So yeah, I just think it's a great step forward, and it's another, I'm also a cyclist, so yeah, it'd be great cycling in the city centre. So that's all.
I think you know, this is very much an interim step. I think it's still needed because we still need to drive down pollution levels. We're not quite at compliant levels in Dundee. We're probably not far away, but this should get us there. But then the next big push is going to be, as you say, you know, more electric vehicles. Perhaps Scottish Government are consulting or have committed to consulting on ultra low emission city centres or zero emission city centres, which would, as part of the kind of climate change challenge, if you like. So this is very much an interim stage, I think, because we should have been meeting these levels for NO2 from about 2010, and we're not. So, you know, that's why we need to just have this interim measure, if you like, of the low emission zones in the main cities to achieve that. But yeah, this is not the kind of end of the process as we see the kind of climate change agenda move, become more important. It is already important, but there's going to be even closer focus on that in the coming years, I think.
The other thing to highlight, I've been telling lots of people, I probably shouldn't because it might run out, is the Energy Savings Trust. You can now get interest-free loans for used electric vehicles as well as new ones. The new ones was always a bit off-putting, particularly for small businesses, because they're so expensive. But you can now get interest-free loans for used and new electric vehicles. So that's another one to be pushing with people, along with e-bikes as well. It's always good to give people alternatives.
Yeah, Tom, I was going to ask, you've talked there a bit about the climate plans, and obviously one of your colleagues, Naomi Clark, looks after the CCAP for the city, so the sustainable, I'm going to get whatever it stands for, I'm going to get that wrong, Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan. I think that's what it is, isn't it? And so, you know, we've consulted with her on you know, helping businesses just think more broadly about how they fit into that. And we talked about, you know, well, what about things like living walls, you know, green walls within the city centre that might help with some of the issues that the low emission zone sees. So do you know, like, how is this fitting in with the work that Naomi is doing? Do you know?
I think the low emission zone is very much part of that kind of wider strategy, and there's cross-referencing in the climate council's climate action plan to the low emission zone, but it's all about making the city centre more attractive, more healthy, you know, all these things. So yeah, there are links. We do know what's going on. I think our group is very much focused on delivering the low emission zone, because although, as you've identified, it's reasonably simple to understand, but the process of getting there, you know, and looking at all the kind of details that you've got to cover has been quite a complex process. But in terms of presentation of what we're doing, it is fairly straightforward. So our focus has been very much on the low emission zone, but we know we're not doing that in isolation. There's all these other issues that are coming into play. The low emission zone primarily is a local air quality measure, if you like, to improve local air quality. But we're obliged to kind of make sure that what we're doing is in line with this climate change and reduction in you know, CO2 emissions as well. So it's all part of the, you know, the same picture. I suppose is the best way to put it.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. That's good. And I think, I mean, I don't know, I'm sorry if David, if you maybe covered this, but it feels like that 2-year grace period is really quite a sensible option. Have the other cities chosen to kind of do something similar, or some of them taking a harder line?
No, in actual fact, it's very similar. So Aberdeen and Edinburgh are proposing roughly the same timelines. I think the dates for Aberdeen are almost exactly the same, but both are doing a 2-year grace period. Glasgow are introducing it slightly earlier, but they have had a low emission zone in place from 2018 that targeted a proportion of bus journeys, and it's sort of a stepped up approach. But it's only by maybe 6 months earlier that they're going for full low emission zones. So all the cities are broadly in line.
Great. Gregor.
Alison, can I maybe come in just on the comment about climate change? So I'm Gregor Hamilton. I'm the Council's Head of Planning and Economic Development, so working alongside Tom. Some of you may be aware that we are currently preparing a city centre strategic investment plan, which is trying to take a 30-year vision that considers how the city centre might develop over that period and what we need to do now to place us in the best position to continue the success of the city centre into the future. So things like the low emission zone, we're aware of that and we're building that into the thinking that we're having. Public realm is one of the key themes, and I think air quality certainly sits within that. And then there is an overarching understanding that we need to think about climate change as we're developing that piece of work. So it is something that we are actively considering. We have been out to consultation ourselves on that document. That was just before Christmas of last year. And I think it's fair to say that issues about cars and car parking are one of the most polarizing parts of the debate, because there are people, I think, who absolutely see the benefits in having car-free streets as enhancing the attractiveness of the city centre as a place to visit and to be in. But there are still others who think that the need to be able to get their vehicle close to where they want to go is critical. And I think there are some businesses that feel that way as well. And if customers can't park close by, then they may be persuaded to go elsewhere rather than come into the city centre. So that's one of the issues that we are grappling with. And I think it's recognising that we're having that discussion and giving it some thought within a context of that climate change commitment to net zero. And there is a direction of travel that, you know, public policy is moving. We just need to make sure that the city centre keeps step with that, but also that we take stakeholders with us along that journey.
Yeah, I think you're right, Greg, and I think there's lots of opportunity as well to kind of use that as a selling point, isn't it, for the city centre to be a really nice place to kind of experience might be your day job, or it might be the place that you live. So yeah, it's interesting times though. Well, I don't really think we've got any other questions in it, unless MD really wants to put their hand up or jump in. I think we're good.
Alison, sorry, it's Lauren here from Business Gateway.
Go for it.
Today, by the way, how are you doing? I was just going to ask, obviously, I'm one of the business advisors at Business Gateway Tayside, and it's not the LEZ is not something that many businesses have spoken to or asked us anything about. Does sorry, the chap's name, I can't remember what his name is now, so many names on the screen. Tom it is. Tom, have you had much engagement from sort of city centre businesses, you know, smaller ones, not necessarily obviously the larger ones?
I think at our last, the consultation sort of meeting we had, or that we took part in I think it was a business recovery meeting, there was a few smaller businesses represented at that. We haven't yet, because the consultation's not closed, we haven't fully analysed the comments that are coming in. But I think there are a number from smaller businesses in the city centre, but I can't say that there's been, you know, well, I can't really quantify how many, but there have been a few, but not large, on a large scale.
Okay. Something we'll keep in mind though.
We did do a leaflet drop to every postal address in the low emission zone, including businesses. So every business in the low emission zone will have should have received just a small leaflet pointing them to the direction of the website and giving some basic information about the consultation. So we have tried as best we can to get the message out. There's also been sort of social media output during the consultation as well. So, we have tried to let people know that we want their views. So we'll see what comes in after the consultation closes. We'll be having a look at all that.
Well, that's interesting. Thank you, Tom. That's appreciated.
Yeah, and I think, if we can, because I mean, this is the thing is, it's although, and I hate to say this, but although it's consultation, it's coming, isn't it? It's just, what the end result is, and influencing that if we feel very strongly one way or the other. But I think then the next bit that's important is getting everybody compliant so that nobody's caught out by anything. And we've got lots of time to do that, but it'd be great to kind of use Business Gateway and the other networks to help kind of get the message out about that too. the funding and all the other options that are available. So people could just get ready.
It's probably worth saying, when we did the consultation back in the back end of 2019, we did get I think we got over 1,000 responses to that. And it was about 65% of respondents from all sectors, whether it be private individuals or businesses or green groups, or, you know, 65% in favour of a low emission, the principle of a low emission zone in the city. So that's kind of why we've not asked about that again. We've established that already. This is about, here's our scheme. What do you think about it? And to get comments on that.
Great. Well, I think if there's no other comments or anything else, I think that'll do us for the time being. But yeah, I mean, Tom, David, Jennifer, Gregor, you know, use the chamber, obviously Business Gateway as well, and the other networks to kind of keep just getting the conversation out. And I would echo what Trudy said. If there's something that we could use, a flyer or kind of something to encourage people to start thinking now about their vehicles and what they can do to get themselves ready for it, that would be really useful. So yeah, folks, thank you very much for taking the time to come on, and you'll get the presentation and there'll be contact details as well, and we'll share that web address again in case you want to go on and just give some burning feedback before that deadline. But yeah, thanks so much for your time. Tom and David, thank you for coming on and kind of talking to everybody. That's been really useful. Thanks, folks. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.